good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, everybody, to everyone joining us for this session, and a warm welcome to all of our speakers for this Daring Cities 2023 session. My name is Ben Hanse, Head of Research and Innovation with the Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, the largest global alliance for city climate leadership, now amassing more than 12,800 commitments from cities and local governments around the world, and now being able to say that at least 1 in every 8 people around the world are residents of a GCOM committed municipality. It's my pleasure to welcome you all to this Daring Cities 2023 session, which is part 2 of the research and innovation towards a just and equitable climate emergency response installment focused on Innovate for Cities, research agendas as a driving force for change. Before we get started with our exciting panelists today, I'd like to review just a few housekeeping items so you know how to participate in today's event, as we want to make sure it's as interactive as possible. As you can see, you've been automatically muted. However, you'll have the opportunity to submit your questions to today's presenters by typing them into the Q&A box in Zoom. You may, of course, send in those questions at any time, and we'll collect them and address them towards the end of the session. And you can, of course, upvote other participants' questions just by clicking on the like button to indicate that you're also interested in having that question asked. This function will, of course, help us address the most voted questions first. This webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be shared on the Daring Cities website. This way, we can ensure that the insights from this discussion impact well beyond the session to experts in different time zones or those who, unfortunately, are not able to join us today. So then, without further ado, and maybe just to provide some additional context before we bring in our very exciting panelists for the day, a little bit about Innovate for Cities. And hopefully everyone can see the slides there on the screen. But if you haven't heard of it before, it's the initiative from the Global Covenant of Mayors Alliance to accelerate city climate action through research, knowledge, and innovation. And as I mentioned, we have more than 12,800 of these cities and local governments who are committed to climate action. They represent collectively more than 1 billion people, and they also represent an incredible amount of potential to reduce emissions around the world, which is one of the key asks and certainly the key needs that we see of cities and local governments in the fight against climate, and certainly a big part of our advocacy around multi-level governance and the need to ensure that national governments, regional governments are able to leverage the work, the efforts, the kinetic energy, and the potential that cities themselves wield as part of this battle. We know that they're on the front lines, but as our city climate action journey lets us know and reminds us always, those cities need financing and they need capacity to turn that ambition into action. And it's key that then we have an opportunity to help build all of that financing and capacity by identifying what the crucial needs are that those cities face. And through Innovate for Cities, we've been able to establish 2 crucial agendas that help us uncover just that in collaboration with many of the partners that you'll hear from today. The first of those is the Global Research and Action Agenda, which is our foundational barometer, as we like to say sometimes, for urban climate research and innovation, enshrining the different priorities that cities, practitioners, partners themselves have said are necessary if we are to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. The inner ring in the wheel, if you can see that, is focused on cross-cutting topics like data, health, systems, approaches. The middle ring is really around more perhaps topical or sectoral, if you will, elements of activity, so around infrastructure, finance, formality, but also introducing relatively new topics to the conversation like history and cultural heritage, which should always be part of these discussions and never disregarded when we're talking about climate action that is equitable and sustainable. And then in the outermost ring is a focus on the enablers, how we get to achieving progress across each of these topics and issues. And that's through partnership, that's through co-producing knowledge, and that's through empowering cities and local governments themselves to take that action. On the right-hand side, we have a practical, perhaps, translation or implementation of the Global Research and Action Agenda, and that's through the City Research and Innovation Agenda, taking local policymakers, certainly taking partners and other readers as well through the policy process. So asking questions like how we build the evidence for data, how and for whom we should be prioritizing, again, in that context of the just transition, really identifying the actions that we need to take. And then, of course, as mentioned previously, how we then get to financing and scaling that action. These agendas, together with the entire Innovate for Cities community, and certainly led by and shepherded by the Research and Innovation Technical Working Group of the Global Covenant of Mayors, again, all of whom our panelists are part of, really help set the stage for the actions that ought to take place if we are to make meaningful progress towards Paris. And we've seen a lot of that interaction already produce fruits over the last few years. I mentioned previously in 2021, we hosted the first ever Innovate for Cities conference alongside UN Habitat back in October, and that amassed nearly 7,000 participants from 159 countries and bringing together more than 200 presentations and sessions, and was a very helpful opportunity to evolve the agendas that you just saw on the previous slide, but also then to feed in to the assessment cycles for the IPCC and really inject the local perspective into what have been traditionally nationally driven discussions to highlight A, the urban opportunity, but also then B, highlight the risk as well that countries would be incurring by not including local governments into their climate action plans and certainly into their NDCs. How are we moving this needle forward? And we'll hear about this more today from our panelists, but we have an exciting set of engagements, events, convenings that are taking place under the Innovate for Cities banner. First, of course, is the Innovate for Cities Global Marketplace, which is now set to take place from the 10th to the 12th of October, so just in a week and a half's time, but a shared space that we're crafting here alongside all of our partners to connect cities and local governments with solution providers across business, across academia, across civil society, to help set them up in the best way possible to catalyze partnerships that are meaningful and help drive that action. More on that in a bit later. And as well, just to keep in mind that 2021 conference that I mentioned is also set to come back next year in 2024. But it is that premier convening at the nexus of cities, climate change, science, and policy innovation. And we're very much looking forward to bringing everyone on board across these two engagements. And it really is the bread and butter of the Innovate for Cities community. Just before I close and pass on to our esteemed panelists, just want to highlight, if you haven't seen this yet, because the global marketplace is so close, it's worth reminding everyone that registration is not closed and it will never close, I'm very happy to say. We still welcome folks who are interested in joining. And again, regardless of what sector of society you represent, organization that you work with, we welcome your knowledge, we welcome your expertise and your resources to be able to then help cities really take that action, or even just to share ideas that can help put cities in that direction. So if you have a moment, do scan these QR codes that you see on the slide, or just head over to innovateforcities.org to get yourself registered for the event itself. So I hope that was a useful primer for our conversation today. Again, Innovate for Cities hosting a lot of the two agendas that we're focusing on as drivers for meaningful change and securing a just and equitable transition. But that's more than enough from me. I'd love to introduce our distinguished speakers for this session, who I hope you could also see now on your screen. I'll just introduce them all, and then we'll go through and hear from each of them one by one. But first, Giulia Melica, a scientific officer with the Joint Research Center from the European Commission. Lea Ranalda, associate program management officer with UN Habitat. Pablo Sebastián Mariani, who's policy officer with the UCLG World Secretariat. Laura Perry, who's senior manager for partnerships and fundraising at CDP. And last but certainly not least, Amy Jones, who's officer for urban research, innovation, and development at the ICLE World Secretariat team. And I must give a special shout out to Amy, who's been absolutely instrumental in helping organize and set up the global marketplace that's about to take place in a week and a half's time. Now, just diving right into it, and maybe we'll start with Giulia, but this question is for everybody. What is the value of these two agendas, the Global Research and Action Agenda and the City Research and Innovation Agenda? And what's the value in helping them grow? Giulia, I pass the floor to you.
Thanks a lot, Ben, and good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank ICLE for organizing this session at the Daring Cities Forum and giving us the opportunity to discuss this importance of city-led R&I and action to address the climate crisis. So as Ben said, I work at the Joint Research Center of the European Commission. JRC supports since 2008 the European Covenant of Mayors, and since 2017 the Global Covenant of Mayors, developing methodologies and guidebooks that are adapted to various world regions on how to develop a climate action plan. Our role is also to co-chair the Data Technical Working Group of the Global Covenant of Mayors that has the aim to ensure the overall methodological coherence of the initiative. A key part of our work on the Covenant relates to data. So we collect data submitted by cities through one of the GCOM official reporting platforms, the My Covenant one. We clean, we validate them, and we publish them as open data in order to encourage scientific research on the initiative. Based on this data, we also publish yearly assessment reports showing collective progress made by signatory cities. Another important part of our work relates to capacity building activities. For example, we conduct regional trainings for cities on how to develop a climate action plan. And we have also developed an e-learning course on the EU Academy platform. So it's clear that to tackle the climate crisis, there is a need to accelerate action and to step up the ambition of cities, as well as other actors that are also in the city environment. It's extremely important to regularly take stock of research gaps so that the research and innovation community can somehow reflect on how to address these gaps and develop new tools with and for cities. So for this reason, I think that global research and action agenda and the city R&I agenda have a huge value because they identify the R&I priorities based on real exchanges between policymakers, decision makers, cities, businesses, academia, in order to really foster effective climate action at city level. However, we need to be conscious of the new opportunities and also the new challenges that are emerging continuously. So these are probably different from one region of the world to another. And I think it's really important to identify what are the crucial ones that can foster the implementation of the agendas, or maybe to the opposites that could undermine this, and to take the necessary corrective measures. For example, I see increasing opportunities to reinforce collaboration between different levels of government, with national governments that are becoming increasingly aware of the role of cities, of the need to join forces with cities to support them and to mutually support in order to achieve the ambitious climate neutrality by 2050, for example, this at the level of European Union. So I think I will stop here for the time being and pass the floor back to you, Ben. Thank you.
Julia, thank you so much for those poignant remarks, and certainly coming from the JRC perspective, it's important to see obviously the role of data and what that can play, but also very enlightening to hear the need to look much deeper within each of the regions to understand what the differentiated needs are for the different cities and local governments that reside within. Thank you so much. We'll come back to you in a little bit. I do want to pass the floor now to Leah for you in Habitat to speak a little bit on the same question around helping grow the GRAA and the CRAA. Leah, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Ben, and good evening, everybody from Japan. Lovely to be here with you this evening, and thanks so much for putting together this super exciting and really important event. I mean, I think maybe to let me start, I think we can all agree that we are right now at a pivotal moment, really a changing point. We had the results of the global stocktake published a couple of weeks ago, and they clearly do show that we are not on track to meet the goals of the Paris Agreement. The positive news, though, is that emissions in cities can really reach net zero. But, and the big but is here, we need to put the money, the resources, but also the data in there to help them reach that. Maybe just from a brief experience talk to a city stakeholder last week about reducing emissions, and they said, well, great, we can track what we emit, but we don't even know how to get the most basic data in. So just that really important point of data that Julia just also mentioned is just so absolutely crucial to get there. So yes, emissions can reach net zero. They need the money, they need the data, but they also definitely need the innovation, the science, and just the technologies at the local level. So maybe just briefly to say what UN Habitat has been doing to also help facilitate this process is, of course, firstly, I mean, we are working with the Global Covenant of Mayors, and as Ben has already introduced, to put together this really exciting event in about 3 weeks' time. So if you have not signed up yet, another reminder to please sign up to join us at the Global Virtual Marketplace. I hope we can also put maybe not only the QR code up, but also the link for registration into the chat. I also want to highlight we've published together with the World Meteorological Organization a publication on United in Science that also brings home exactly a similar point that the climate emergency is happening in cities. We are seeing extreme weather events, but we really need to close the gap between research, innovation, and science at the local level to bring home the importance of cities and weather and climate at the local level to also help achieving the SDGs. Thirdly, we just had the UN Habitat Assembly. We did have a resolution related to urbanization and climate change, and really highlighted also there the commitment of the importance of cities to achieve global climate goals, the SDGs. And what was really exciting in there, it also anchored, as I hope many of you know, we did have a first ever ministerial meeting at COP27 last year, and it anchored the importance of having these ministerial meeting level dialogues happening at the climate conferences. So in case you have not heard yet, also very happy to announce that we will have a second ministerial meeting at COP28 in Dubai on the 6th of December as the curtain raiser event for this day dedicated to multi-level action, urbanization, built environment, and transport. And what's exciting is, of course, this is an opportunity to showcase the gaps that exist at the local level, but also showcase what is happening, what are base case studies, but also what do we need to do in order to close some of the research gaps, but also some of the financing gaps at the local level. And then last, already briefly mentioned, just to highlight again, super excited that we will have another conference happening for 2024, also really as this space to bring together cities, climate change, science policy, innovation, and all the stakeholders really help advance this global research and action agenda. And that to you, Ben. Thanks so much.
Leah, I should be thanking you much, much more. I could be thinking of many other things to be doing on a Friday night in Japan. So really thank you for taking the time to spend that with us. And just to go back to a lot of the points that you raised, it's great to see the resonance with so many of the topics in the two agendas. You mentioned finance, data, capacity for action, and of course, and apologies, I should have mentioned this at the very beginning, just a linkage back out to the Sustainable Development Goals and the progress that we need to be making against all of them, and how the interlinkages really play. And just want to underscore the importance of the role of events like the second Urban Ministerial to look forward to at COP28. Again, just highlighting that folks are starting to listen across other levels of government, and that we have channels, thanks to partners like yourself, that we're starting to build in for that advocacy to be heard by even more audiences, and to really ingrain into a lot of the work that we're doing. So thank you for sharing all of that. We'll come back again for the next round of questions, and great to have you on. Would love to now pass the floor over to my colleague and good friend, Pablo Mariani from UCLG. Pablo, the floor is yours.
Hi, can you hear me? Yes. Okay. So hello everyone, colleagues, friends. Thank you, Italy, for putting this event together. It's a pleasure to be here discussing the great importance that these research agendas have. As you know, last year our membership, the UCLG membership, adopted the Pact for the Future, which is a very ambitious set of commitments to ensure a prosperous future for all, which has a focus on people, on planet, and on government. However, these commitments require research and innovation to show us new ways to achieve them. So there's a huge value in helping these agendas grow. There is potential for finding solutions within the limits of action of local and regional governments. be they finance limits, capacity limits, or mandate limits, and have systematically addressed all of the impacts they suffer from climate change, including innovative views on gender, on traditional knowledge, on ways of life. Just as you said, Ben, during the introduction, Innovate for Cities has been a key player in updating the global research and action agenda, and including cross-cutting themes such as systemic approaches, justice and equity, and spearheading new topical themes such as history and cultural heritage, which for us is extremely important. This is the type of growth that we'd like to see in these agendas, a growth that values, finds place for hard and soft knowledge, and that incorporates unlearning as a strategy to accelerate climate action. We have examples of this in the UCLG Gold 6 report, which shows us how we can address inequality at the local level by renaturing our cities and ensuring no one is left behind. We must understand that a one-size-fits-all is not an approach that works, and that scalability, of course, is and should always be one of the key considerations of the research agendas. We must highlight the importance of city typologies and learn from the experience of intermediary cities. We do at UCLG have a huge wealth of experience in this regard. As Leah said, and I want to call back to this again, the moment is pivotal. There is a call to action globally to address inequality through climate action. This is urgent. The world is looking at local and regional governments as the cornerstone of hope to achieving the SDGs. So well said, Ben, we are not on track to realizing the goals. And to realize them, we must build the bridges, and we must understand that all the goals from the Paris Agreement, from the SDGs, and other global agendas are interconnected, and we must reach them together if we want to achieve this back for the future. So I encourage us that to make the Innovate for Cities marketplace that is coming up, and I'm very excited to take part of a true gathering of innovation and solutions, and forge together a pathway towards climate resilience, equity, and sustainability at local level. So thank you.
Pablo, thank you so much. A very concise intervention, but jam-packed with so many resources, and certainly a lot of the key messages that we're hearing as well. Great to hear you share the work around Pact for the Future that you've done, and just that triple header focus, right, on people, planet, and government. So emblematic of the work that we're collectively trying to take on, and it's great to see partners like UCLG spearheading that. But also on Gold 6, I think one of the things that I think we heard from you for the first time in this session was the focus on nature, nature-based solutions, and the need to bring that into the fold with greater magnitude and with greater importance. And certainly there's a lot of knowledge to be gained there from those who have specialized in that, those who have specialized in it also because they have no other choice, and they need to be able to adapt to the impacts of climate change today and yesterday. So again, I really appreciate you drawing a lot of the linkages that we're seeing across different priorities in the agendas. Laura Perry from CDP would love to hear from you next, just on this question of the value of growing the agendas. I'll pass the floor over to you.
Thank you so much, Ben, for the introduction and for hosting us today. And thank you to ICLEI colleagues for such a brilliant event and series as part of Daring Cities. So as Ben mentioned, I'm joining you today on behalf of CDP, the not-for-profit charity that runs a global disclosure system for investors, companies, cities, states, and regions to manage their environmental impacts. So every year, cities, states, and these other stakeholders share a huge volume of really useful data with us, which we publish on the CDP Open Data Portal. And the aim is that academics, national governments, and NGOs use this information in line with the two research agendas to develop the research, innovation, and action that cities need to deliver. We also use this data to build and publish insights and calls to action from those investors, those national governments, and other actors, sharing what cities are telling us about the support and the enabling environment they need. I think a good example of this was our report last year on People and Planet, looking at how cities are using participatory approaches and involving communities in climate action planning and implementation. So more specifically on the agendas, I think the value of these agendas can be gathered just from their titles alone: global and city, innovation and action. I think limiting and preparing for the impacts of climate change is one of humanity's defining challenges. And too often, cities find themselves faced with these false dichotomies, whether to invest in energy efficiency or renewable energy generation, cycling infrastructure and behavior change, or electric vehicle infrastructure. And civil society and NGOs face similar challenges all the time: global or local, research and innovation, or action and implementation. And I think what the agendas tell us is we don't need to choose. It's everything, everywhere, all at once. but this sounds like chaos. So they also give us structure, guiding us towards which areas of key intervention are needed based on those insights from cities themselves, and focusing as a global community of local actors on the specific challenges we all face. So finally, and most importantly, the agendas help us collaborate and exchange ideas and learnings. The agendas are so expansive and far-reaching that it would be impossible for one city or one organization to find all these answers alone. Instead, they allow us to share the burden and share knowledge and pool our collective resources and brainwaves towards a collective goal. So thank you to everyone who put together the agendas and continues to take them forward, because I think this is what we really need to kind of drive that collective action moving forward.
Laura, thank you so much, and also really appreciate there just extracting a lot of the key takeaways from the agendas that seem so relevant and apparent to the local context. And just that last piece as well around sharing the burden. I don't think that gets talked about enough. And the opportunity here for us as City Network partners, as alliances, to come together and to not have to rely on any one organization to get the job done, but rather to leverage each of everyone's sort of comparative advantages, if you will, different levels of expertise, different sectors of expertise, working with different cities, local governments, NGOs, and others to really help make progress is quite deep. And again, really appreciate you sharing that. Last but not least, very happy to pass the floor now to Amy Jones from ICLEI World Secretariat to share a little bit from her perspective also.
Thank you, Ben. It's a pleasure to be participating in this discussion today. So to dive in, the Global Research and Action Agenda and the City Research and Innovation Agenda are really instrumental to ICLEI's work. ICLEI was the first network of cities to put together a global research and innovation strategy. So this is really designed to operationalize the GRAA, and this coincided with the time we established the Research and Innovation Technical Working Group in the GCOM space. So one of the pioneers of which was our own head of urban research, innovation and development, Poria Salehi, who co-chairs this group. So I think this context shows that there's a really close connection that exists between the GRAA, the CIA, and ICLEI's global research and innovation strategies. So not just in terms of some of our technical experts who contributed to the agenda, but also in our work to operationalize and put this wonderful agenda into action. And also the updated gaps and priority topics really strongly informed our research, apologies, symposium last year at ICLEI World Congress, where the goal was to progress selected critical knowledge gaps identified in the agenda and bring stakeholders around the table to connect and co-design research and innovation projects. So I think that growing these agendas is really important. And for cities, the uncertainty and the complexity posed by the climate crisis means that decision makers require constant access to actionable and fit for purpose knowledge that's relevant to their local context, so that we can avoid there being this mismatch between the critical nature of decisions cities need to make and then the availability of information for cities to be able to make informed decisions. And then lastly, these agendas also assist cities in defining their priority areas, which is so crucial because it's the first step to implementing solutions. So growing these agendas and updating them periodically is so important, so that cities can continue to have access to a roadmap for addressing climate change. And also it means there's this common framework in place so that organizations working with cities are able to provide support around this common agenda. So thank you.
Amy, thank you so much. And again, especially for your role in helping put the global marketplace together. It's true, ICLEI plays takes up a special space in the context of urban research and innovation, being one of the pioneers, and appreciate again just the linkage out to many of the priority areas that you've highlighted here. that sort of brings us to a close on the first part of our session. So thank you so much to all our panelists who've given really concise but really insightful responses all at the same time. I have a few questions that I'd love to ask each of the panelists, and I'm kind of stumped actually because many of you have already provided at least partial answers to all of them. So we'll do our best to bring together some unique content. But just a reminder to all of our colleagues and friends in the audience, questions are welcome at any time. Please do feel free to drop those in the chat, and we'll address those certainly as soon as we can. So just as all our panelists come online here on the screen, and it's great to see everyone all together. Just this first question, again, I think most, if not everyone, has really spoken about the Innovate for Cities global marketplace, which is coming up on the 10th to the 12th of October. And again, some of you have mentioned partially the response to this question already. But just looking at the shared space that it offers for connecting cities, local governments with potential solutions providers, what does that specific event offer each of you in your respective networks or organizations in terms of working towards accelerating urban research and innovation, or indeed sort of the action that we're all really clamoring for and calling for? We'll just go back from the top. Julia, happy to start with you, and then we can go from there.
Thanks a lot, Ben, for this question. Indeed, Innovate for Cities Global Marketplace is an excellent opportunity for us to hear about emerging priorities at city level in relation to climate action. So in my first intervention, you may have understood that our strong focus is on methodologies. So methodologies to develop climate action plan. So in this marketplace, we expect, for example, to hear about methodological challenges and solutions that are being experimented by cities around the world. And we have the intention also to make a pitch about some aspects that we're trying to develop in terms of guidance for cities on how to account, for example, for carbon sinks or scope 3 emissions. So these are aspects that we consider quite challenging, and we would really like to hear more about what is going on among partners. Another opportunity, I think, is represented by the chance to present some tools. For example, we have at GRC a tool on air quality. So this allows to assess the co-benefits on air quality from climate action. And we would like to present it and gather feedback from cities on how this could become even more useful for them to understand, because I think it's also important to understand the co-benefits of climate action. And this is something that we count to exploit during the meeting. I would say that during this marketplace, we will be mainly in a listening mode, so really open to hear about the challenges and solutions proposed by cities and other partners. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much, Julia. No, that's helpful to hear. I'm just going to start popcorning now, which is slightly a facilitator's privilege. So apologies to my panelists. But Pablo, let me jump to you. Curious to get your thoughts in terms of where some of the value for events like these really help with UCLG.
For us, it's a great way to understand what I said in my intervention. Through which ways, through which mechanisms, through which tools, through which venues can we actually achieve those things that our membership commits to? And this is the most important thing for us. And also, it's a great place to understand and see where new research topics, where new issues, where new tools, where new sort of innovative processes come up that for us as the representation of politicians, we're not extremely aware of, but also help us make that bridge between the political willingness and the concrete climate action that needs to take place.
Thank you, Pablo. Again, super concise, but very insightful, and always appreciate the insight that you shared there. Leah, from UN Habitat's perspective, obviously a special one here. We co-host a lot of the Innovate for Cities convenings together, but very curious to hear your perspectives as well.
I mean, I think Ben, as a co-host of this event, I can only, of course, say fantastic things about it. But maybe just also from a personal perspective, I mean, I participated in a few of these discussions, and it's, as Julia already said, of course, a lot about hearing what are the emerging priorities at the local level, what's kind of getting a bit of a feel, what's on a thematic, topical level, what's really a field where more and more cities also want to move into, where they need more knowledge, where there are gaps, where there are priorities that need to be filled. So, for example, just to share, I found it really interesting that more and more cities really want to learn how to scale up renewables, which has to do with the energy crisis, of course. So just to really get a feel of what's really moving the needle at the local level. But then, of course, also showcasing some of our success stories, some of our global partners, some of the cities that we work with. And I think what I'm also really excited about in this global virtual marketplace is the fact that it is global. That's a unique opportunity. Often these gatherings tend to be really at the regional level. So the fact that it is virtual, although we will, of course, have thematic focuses for each, time focuses for each time zone, it is an opportunity to also facilitate that global exchange between cities, but also with academia, with other partners that are active in this space. So really excited. And as a last thing, before I hand the word back to you, is we will also have a virtual booth there. So anybody who wants to learn more about what we're doing and who wants to just have a chat with us can also swing by virtually in person. Back to you, Ben.
Yeah, it's almost like taking the time travel back a couple of years, maybe without so much of the negative stuff that was floating around back then as well, but really highlighting the power of the virtual event and the chance to have a booth and just be reached out to connect with folks online. Thanks for highlighting a lot of those opportunities, Leah. Laura, I'll jump to you. Curious to get your thoughts, the value proposition for CDP.
Yeah, thank you, Ben. And I had the privilege of joining one of the in-person marketplaces in London, which was such an enjoyable day. So thank you for having me as part of this session. I think for me, one of the things that struck me as part of that session was just the diversity of voices. So we had, cities and counties from different levels of subnational government. We had solution providers from a whole range of different kind of sectors and types of business and organization as well. So I was in a breakout around transport, and you had such a mixture of kind of cycle sharing solutions, data modeling solutions, electric vehicle charging solutions. And I think as someone who spent a fair amount of time at transport conferences, it's unusual that you have all of those actors in the same conversation and discussion actually kind of working together. And as I mentioned earlier, we need all those solutions. So I think it's very valuable to kind of break down those silos and have all those solutions in the same place. And from CDP's perspective, I say we have a pretty good understanding of city challenges. Once a year we ask cities what their challenges are, and we get pretty comprehensive responses. And so what was really useful is to start identifying, additional partners to add to our community to start to solve some of those challenges and solutions. What's worked in specific cities that we could share information about with others or with our NGO partners. As part of that kind of process of CDP ICLEI track. So yeah, for me, it was about identifying, who needs to be in our community, who isn't already, that we can kind of accelerate action in cities by making those connections. But a really enjoyable day, and I definitely look forward to the global marketplace in a couple of weeks.
Laura, you're reading my mind. Please hold that thought really on the kinds of partnerships that you find most crucial, because I will come back to that. And just fabulous to hear as well that there was already value sort of in the in-person interactions from the regional marketplace that we had hosted together with KPMG and Climate Action back in London in June. But first, just maybe before I come back to you, Laura, Amy, curious to hear your thoughts. Global marketplace, obviously we mentioned ICLEI sort of being pioneers in the research and innovation space for cities. Curious to understand the value for you all.
Thank you. I think when we have these shared spaces of dialogue, discussion and interaction, and when we manage to get a room or a virtual space full of city leaders, innovators, researchers, technical experts, private sector experts, I think really the sky is the limit. So it's really exciting. And we saw this at ICLEI World Congress, which I mentioned, where we pioneered very much hand in hand with GCOM this kind of research marketplace format. And since then, we've seen it be applied in various formats, various contexts. So I think we see that it becomes more and more robust as time goes on. And at ICLE, we're really happy and proud to be a supporting partner of the Innovate for Cities global marketplace. And these spaces provide an opportunity for cities to connect with other actors and align on shared understandings and opportunities to act on the identified gaps in local climate change knowledge and implementation. And I think a really key aspect of shared spaces like the Innovate for Cities global marketplace is that it's designed to be a catalyst, and the crucial conversations that will be taking place, they're not going to just remain contained in that moment in time where we meet for the event. It's very much the opposite. And the legacy of the global marketplace will be the partnerships that are formed that leverage common priorities and aspirations and drive the implementation of city climate action and solution, all geared under this goal of net zero climate resilience and a secure future. And I'm excited as well to see the outcomes of the Innovate for Cities global marketplace and how it shapes the Innovate for Cities conference that you mentioned next year, Ben, as well.
Amy, so well said. And I think what you mentioned about robustness will land quite well with those of us in the Innovate for Cities community who have a bit more of a scientific or an academic leaning. I'm looking at Julia, of course, but not only Julia, we have many academics who are part of our community, and obviously where research really forms the bedrock of the agendas that we have and the work that we take on. That's what we mentioned all the time about evidence-based action, right? So thanks so much for sharing that, Amy. Laura, I did promise I would come back to you. So just very quickly, and this is a question for everyone also, partnerships. We're mentioning it all the time for Innovate for Cities as a community. But just now for each of the specific issues, who do you feel like we need to be partnering with now if we really want to accelerate climate action implementation for cities and local governments this critical phase? And I didn't we, but maybe I'll make it even more direct. Who do you need to be partnering with? Who do you want to be knocking on the doors of come not only the marketplace, but and months?
So like my job title, volunteer. I think with a slightly kind of downcast note, I think it's to understand the wider context of this conversation. So I'm on vision and action, and for me that's why collaboration is important. So we can't necessarily rely on this ambition loop sort of approach that we had previously, that national governments would inspire local action. I mean, it's the other way around, right? That's what we're seeing. And at the same time, we've got this really exciting news that the first ever COP-hosted local climate action summit is taking place at COP28 this year. So we have, at the same time, national government wavering and local government really taking center stage in this recognition of the role. And then from CDP's perspective, we sit at this really powerful intersection between around 18,000 companies, around 800 investors, and over 1,000 city, states, and regions who report through us or through CDP and ClayTrack. And so we see so clearly this potential impact of cities working with each other, with businesses, and with capital markets. And I'm really excited to see that work carry on. We get cities and businesses working together. And we've started this work alongside C40 and the World Business Council for Sustainable Development. We run something called the City Business Climate, and this is many cities working together and with their local businesses to form partnerships with the private sector to actually deliver against their ambitious climate goals. Because we see cities and businesses with these really ambitious targets, they need to work together. So for me, it's not necessarily, who does CDP need to work with? We have all of these friends on this call. It's about how can we bring together these different sectors and help them implement at scale and pace, because we can't wait for national government.
Laying down the gauntlet. I love it. And I especially love hearing the focus as well on those alliances with business. We hear a lot sort of from both sides signaling that everyone's ready to work with one another, but again, really getting down into the details of what public-private partnerships could potentially look like, what that sharing of knowledge, capacity, resource could actually look like from private to local or vice versa. Again, those are the things that we really need to start unpacking. So couldn't agree with you more, Laura. Julia, very curious from the JRC's perspective. Obviously, when we talk about the European Commission, usually the European Commission is at the center of the conversation, especially when in the context of the media. But obviously, I know that you all may have your own sort of interests in being able to reach out to strategic partners. Who would you be looking to connect with next?
Okay, thanks, Ben. Well, naturally, our usual partners are policymakers, because since we are the in-house science service of the European Commission, most of our work is aimed at raising their awareness of what cities are doing and how they should be supported further by the European level of policy. However, we also work very closely with cities. So we provide direct support to some cities in the development of their action plans in some regions, but mainly through methodological guidance and capacity building activities. So other partners for us would be like-minded partners, so those that provide this similar support in order to exchange on experiences and become acquainted with other realities and strengthen the level of support that we can give to the cities. I would say this would be really from our perspective.
Thanks so much, Julia. And that's, again, to see the breadth of partners that you would like to work with is signal enough, I would say, for a lot of the priorities that you're looking to tackle that are quite diverse as well across the chip. From your perspective, Ikle, obviously very well connected also, but curious to see who you would be prioritizing working with next.
Well, I think a term that I've had a lot over the course of densities is radical cooperation. And I think this really resonates and is very relevant for our discussion today, because it's this idea of seeing ourselves as part of one system, and the only way that it can function well is when everybody is included in collaboration. So I think it requires this conscious shift in thinking from taking action for the planet, taking action as the planet collectively. So in thinking about the types of partnerships that are crucial to accelerating action, I think we also have to think about the challenge of reshaping partnership dynamics from being purely transactional traditionally to being collaborative and learning based, and putting the emphasis on that instead. So as an organization, ICLE is situated at the intersection of research, policy and practice. So we're committed to operationalizing the agendas that we spoke about earlier. And a big part of this is our strategy for global research and innovation. So at the heart of this is city-led research, where cities are the experts on the intricacies of their own local contexts. So we want to empower them to be part of the journey from identifying root causes of challenges, then co-developing research proposals, carrying out projects, co-developing the knowledge outputs as well, and then the dissemination part. So I think that this is really key to making sure that cities feel the ownership of the research. And then, yeah, I suppose the point that I'll end on is that we know research and innovation have the most impactful results when devised and developed through cross-sectoral partnerships. So it's only when we have a diverse range of actors involved where we get the truly creative and innovative solutions that come out of these processes. So I think that's what we need to be able to address the climate challenges at the speed and scale required.
Collaboration, not transaction. I think I'm going to make a t-shirt this weekend that says this and give one to all of my panelists. That again, very well said, and thank you so much for sharing. And last but not least for this question, Pablo, I want to hear from you, and in part also because I think there's something unique about the role that UCLG plays, not solely focusing on climate and energy, but really reaching across really the full breadth going across all of the SDGs that Leah mentioned earlier. So really curious to understand from you sort of who you would be looking to partner with from your perspective.
One of the key things we have found in Goal 6 is that civil society is our key partner if we want to do an accelerated implementation and have ownership and accountability of actions on the ground. And if we don't partner with them, then there's no longevity in whatever we implement. Also, of course, as local and regional governments, we work on a breadth of topics. We don't only have to address climate change, but have to do service delivery provision of a good set of things that happen in our city. This means that whenever we partner with whomever on climate, climate probably is not going to be the key focus of that partnership, but it must take some sort of role with it. And this goes back to speaking of how do we partner in business. As I said, we don't want what we don't want to see is extractivism type of business, right? And what we want to see is, as she said, a collaborative type of business. We want to see our businesses that flourish, that allow us to have prosperity in our territories. Those are the kind of businesses we're trying to see moving forward. And this means changing the relationship we have, for example, with food systems. How do businesses provide food to a city relate to the issue of addressing climate change? How do water provision affects the issue of climate change? How does sorry, gone blank, but how do the whole breadth of service delivery provision affect the way we address climate change, and how do we partner with each of those actors that are within the chain of service delivery provision? These kind of things are the things we need to revise, and the things that we need to rethink when forming new partnerships towards addressing climate change.
Pablo, thank you so much. I think it really highlights that there are so many different entry points around the messaging and certainly the action, and what might be most conducive to taking that action for local practitioners and decision makers. And I think the work that you do is emblematic of how we need to really take advantage of those windows at the right times, and certainly continue to pile on the kind and gentle pressure, depending on who we're working with, of course, to move the needle in that direction. I know we're almost at time. I did have one more question, but very excitingly, I do see a question in the chat, so I might just go to that. And if you all can't see it, then I'm happy to read it out very quickly. It says, cities already have visions for the future, but these are often compartmentalized into themes such as mobility, for example. How can these sessions help cities to develop integrated and holistic visions for the future, and the steps needed to get there? I know some of you have already touched on this. I think, Laura, you've signaled that you'd like to answer this one. I'm happy to start with you.
I'm not going to admit that may have been a Zoom IT blunder. I think it's precisely because we bring everyone into the room. So a good example from the London marketplace is that the folks who were on the transport discussion table, some of them were more from a planning background, that more traditionally would perhaps look at housing. And so it's looking at, how do we use the existing structures of city government, such as there is a housing department, there is a transport department. How do we bring these departments together for these kind of cross-cutting challenges there, and create this integrated climate action planning that we know we will need?
Perfect. Thank you, Laura. Again, I mean, that covers it all. Any other colleagues, panelists who would like to jump in on that question? Pablo, yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I think thank you, Laura, for also putting in better words what I was trying to say before. No, but I think one of the things that of course, one of the things politicians have is vision for the future, and thanks to that is that they win or lose elections. And one of the things that perhaps we need to start thinking about is that climate policies do not necessarily win elections, right? So how do we ensure, how do we research, how do we innovate into bridging or understanding those political gaps that exist to make politicians better communicate, or make the voting base better adhered to understand why addressing climate change is important. And this gap in politics is something that we need research on and we need to address.
Thanks, Pablo. Amy, Julia, anything you'd like to add to any of that? No need to, of course, just in case.
If I may, Ben, I just would like to add that the Covenant of Mayors really promotes this integrated and holistic approach. So really overcoming the silos approach that was common in the past. So this is really trying to, requires a strong political leadership to make sure that all municipal departments work together and they develop some strategies that are really fit for purpose. So I think this should be said. And I agree also with Pablo when he says about highlighting also the co-benefits of climate action. This is something that should be highlighted, and in order to reinforce the support from other departments and also from local stakeholders.
Thank you, Julia. Amy, I also saw you go off mute. Anything you wanted to add?
I think my fellow panelists have answered it very comprehensively. I think I would just maybe add, I know digitalization and smart cities will be a cross-cutting topic, and I think also, brought forward to the global marketplace and these discussion sessions. So I think this is a good entry point because it can act as a nexus point with so many sectors, and it very much naturally invites us to re-examine silos and forces discussion between different sectors and groups in a brilliant way. So I would say that can also be a great way into more integrated and holistic visions and more integrated and holistic ways of operating for local governments as well.
Perfect. Very, very last question, and I hope the folks who are hosting on the tech side will not kill me for this. One-word responses from each of my panelists. What is the one priority you want to dive into in greater detail through the global marketplace in the next weeks and months? Just the first one that comes to mind, just seeing what really strikes a chord with each of you. Amy, start with you.
I suppose the just transition, I think, it's so important. It encompasses so much. And I think it's a brilliant opportunity to make sure nobody is left behind in these transitions to more sustainable systems.
It's a good one. Laura.
Finance, I'd say. So last year, cities reported to us nearly 2,000 projects that needed financing to a total of $58 billion. And that's the funding gap, not what they've already secured. So I think we need to really knuckle down the mechanisms and also the sources of that finance to help cities deliver.
Amen to that. Pablo.
As I said, I would like to see which ways we could understand a little bit the territorial knowledge and how to shape that kind of soft knowledge into structured mechanisms and structured tools, and also research a little bit on how to address these political gaps that exist.
Thank you. And last but not least, Julia.
Yeah, I think it's important also to support local authorities with data when this is the basis for setting a good climate action plan, and sometimes access to data is very difficult. So I would say this is something to be further developed.
Thank you, Julia. And thank you so much to all of our panelists. I know that Leia had to drop off there. Apologies. But a fantastic session, and really loved hearing each of your perspectives and how you see the value of the research and innovation agendas that we all share. I have to say, I'm extremely privileged. I love the folks that I work with, and these folks that you see on the screen here are just so exemplary of the kind of cross-disciplinary knowledge, just the enthusiasm that they all bring to the table, and of course the partner organizations that we work with. So again, just want to thank them and our broader research and innovation technical working group on the Global Covenant side for a lot of the great work that they're helping guide. And again, if you didn't hear it enough, Innovate for Cities Global Marketplace, 10th to the 12th of October. The links are in the chat. You'll see these same folks there live and in real time. You'll get to work with them as well, send them as many questions, and we'll look to really co-create and collaborate as much as possible. As this session draws to a close, I'd like to take a quick moment to acknowledge the fantastic work of the ICLEI events team on delivering an impactful virtual forum for Daring Cities 2023. And on that note, I'm sure many of you in the audience have attended some of the sessions hosted by the ICLEI Urban Research, Innovation, and Development team. The sessions they've put together have brought together diverse audiences and expert panelists from across research and innovation to discuss and further thinking on critical areas, including digital finance, systemic management innovation, and fulfilling human needs. I'd like to thank them personally for their work in convening these sessions and creating an impact that can inform all of our future discussions. Also, of course, at the Innovate for Cities Global Marketplace this year, onwards to COP28 and beyond into 2024. Whether it's a good morning, a good afternoon, or a good evening, thank you so much for joining us and wishing you a pleasant continuation of your day.